Hello, welcome back to the Podbook. I've been suggesting that we are seeing the beginnings of the emergence of a new type of human being, the Unividual. That the Unividual processes the nature of reality in a more emergent way and responds in a more emergent way. And that is a Unividual ethic. So that when you go up into the Unividual processing and you come into communion with everything and everyone, there's a universal benevolence, and it becomes your individual responsibility to express that universal benevolence. And in the last chapter, I explored how we got there through the evolution of human culture and the different approaches to ethics that we'd had along the way. And in this chapter, I want to look at some of the challenges, 3 challenges in particular, that I think we face in being future people now, of living from that Unividual ethic. Challenges that I've seen, that I've had to face and try and find some wisdom in response to. But before I do that, I want to look at the evolution of evil, if you like, because I've talked about the evolution of what we regard as good, but of course that goes alongside what we regard as bad. And the word evil, although it has strong moralistic connotations and religious connotations for us now, originally, its etymology, it just means the bad thing. So there's natural evils, illness, earthquakes, all the bad things that nature does to us. They are natural evils. And then there's human evils, moral evils, bad things we do to each other. But what we regard as bad changes with what we regard as good and moves alongside the expansion of that sense of who us is, what the group is. So that now we would regard someone who was good in the warrior ethic that dominated human culture for huge parts of history, we'd regard that as really bad. You know, if I came into a group of my friends and went, "Hey, I've just been out and butchered a whole load of men, women and children, but they were the people from the other village," I'd be regarded as a monster, quite rightly. But Alexander the Great did that across the world. Charlemagne, which means Charles the Great, did that endlessly. Massacres. He was still made a saint. We've evolved beyond that now. I've mentioned before in Soul Story, the book behind me, I think the first time, that if Adolf Hitler had been successful and he'd have lived earlier in history, he would have been Adolf the Great. But instead of that, the man who tried to do the same as Alexander and Charles is the epitome of evil. That's because it's moved on. So in our evolving sense of ethics, there's ideas that last. Treat others as you would be treated. It's a pretty good rule. I discussed in the last chapter, it's not always applicable, but it's not a bad rule of thumb. It's so universal. I wrote a book bringing together scriptures from all over the world and just found that in every tradition, that same idea. Treat others as you would be treated. Within the community, of course, not those, the other. You can do what you like to them. But within the community, do this. And it strengthens the group as against potential threats. That has stayed the same. Good. Other ideas? They haven't. Most of history, torture. Just fine. What a great way to find out if someone has committed a crime. Torture them, and then they'll tell you. What a great way to get revenge for someone who's acted badly towards our group. Torture them. That'll teach them. We wouldn't do that today. Justice through armed combat. Two people have different claims about what was true. How can we decide? Well, they'll fight each other, and then God will decide who was really telling the truth. These are ideas which we'd look at now and just go, what? Because we've moved on. They've now become bad things to do. in the past, we're in the modern individualistic phase that we're in and moving now, I think, beyond. It's about individual merit. It's an individual meritocracy where we think we should try and achieve, so that we don't like too much nepotism. You need to achieve it on your own merits. But most of history has been a kind of a family meritocracy. It's the group, the family that is going to rise to the top or not. And that your duty is to the family, not to yourself. And I mean, you can still see that in groups like the mafia, in films and things. So that within that ethic, arranged marriages make perfect sense. It's not very good for you, but it's good for the family. Honor killings of daughters. We see that today and we go, oh God, the guy killed his daughter because he brought shame on the family. The guy arranged a marriage for his little girl to some powerful old guy because it benefited the family. These we would now regard as awful, and I think rightly, because we've evolved. We've evolved into a new ethic. And now we've arrived at this unividual ethic, and I think there's the sense I have now is that, look, the unividual responsibility is to keep evolving wisdom. Is to have a sense of humility, of realizing I'm being as wise as I can, but I've seen my past and it's full of the lack of wisdom. So I need to keep an open system. The emphasis again, open system that can evolve, keep evolving. But the problem we face as individuals, tempting to be future people now, of trying to bring that universal benevolence, kindness, into the world, is that the past is still with us. We live with biology, we live with physics, and all the problems that creates for us. A heavy thing, it's still heavy, you still have to lift it. The body still gets ill, still needs feeding. It hasn't gone anywhere. And the less emergent levels in society are still there. There are people living in the Middle Ages who would have all those views. I've just gone, oh, we wouldn't do that anymore. But they would. They are. And we have to live with that. And we have to live with it in ourselves, so that all of those things that we've evolved beyond, the passivity is still hanging around if we're not careful. And I want to focus on one thing in particular, which I have seen belatedly, really, in my own attempts to become a more unividual person. And that is that the natural process of evolution has given us a pleasure in kindness. We like it. We love it. You watch movies where people are kind, it makes you feel good. We feel good when we're all together, the group. We love that. Oh, people who look after each other. Why? Because it serves the collective, holds us together. But what's a bit more taboo is to acknowledge that we've also learnt or evolved through the same process to find a pleasure in unkindness, because that is also evolutionary advantageous. People who are kind within the group, that will be advantageous to the continuation of the group. But people who are able to be unkind, ruthless, outside the group, is also advantageous. So there's a pleasure to both. And what we've been trying to do, it seems to me, in taming ourselves and then in how we relate as groups, is to nurture that pleasure of kindness and to transcend that pleasure of unkindness. I mean, if you go back to apes, I mentioned in the last chapter, which we split from them in the evolutionary tree about 5 million years ago. And it turns out that even the peaceful bonobos, we think of them as like, the hippies of the ape world, they're vicious, it turns out, to the other. And there's a you can see you watch chimps attacking and torturing other chimps. There's a kind of an ecstasy to it. Why? Because nature favors what will benefit the Homo racis, the continuation of that species or that individual, that group. So here I think we have the evolutionary solution to why the problem of why people are evil. It's because it's been selected for to do things which at the time weren't regarded as evil, but now are. So we've evolved to find both kindness and that unkindness to the other. Kindness within, unkindness to the other. Pleasurable. And you don't have to look back very far. You had a public execution. Huge crowds would turn out to watch someone get burnt to death, wearing their best clothes. We still have a world where we have to wrestle with psychopaths, sociopaths, who are capable of doing all sorts of things. And enjoy it. And what are we doing in response is we're sublimating, it seems to me, and that feels like probably a good step towards that, which is we sublimate it into entertainment, sport, pornography. I enjoy watching a movie where the bad guy suffers. There's a kind of that he deserves that. Well, that's a continue. I don't feel, I don't feel a pleasure in unkindness myself that I'm aware of, but I do enjoy the film. I was taken in Las Vegas by somebody who was interested in my work. Said, "Hey, you'll find this interesting," and she took me to, with my wife Deb, to a dungeon. An S&M dungeon. Said, "What do you make of this?" And what I saw there was really nice people who were sublimating the pleasure of unkindness and turning it into something which was kind of okay for them. There's an unkindness in comedy. I love comedy, don't you? I love it. But there's a lot where you're laughing at putting somebody else down, somebody who's other, someone who has a different political view, someone who's outside the group of people that exists inside that particular room. And you laugh at them, or you laugh at it's unkindness. Not all of it, of course, but it's there. Okay, so what does that mean for being a unividual? Well, I think there's 3 challenges that I'm aware of that I've faced. And all of them, I think, are to do with naivety. And what I mean by that is a lack of wisdom, a lack of evolutionary wisdom. Because what I'm going to suggest and what this chapter is really heading towards is, yes, universal benevolence. Yes, individual responsibility to express that universal benevolence, but also the evolutionary wisdom to do that. So it's wisdom, so you can find the right way to do it, but it's evolutionary wisdom because you understand you're living in an evolutionary emergent process. And it's naive when you don't see that. So that the first thing that I see a lot of, I've seen it in myself for probably most of my life, certainly before this last phase. And I see it elsewhere, especially in the spiritual community and other communities, that people come to this universal benevolence. Fantastic. They genuinely do. But it's without any evolutionary wisdom. And so there's a massive growth in empathy and compassion, but it's naive. And universal benevolence without evolutionary wisdom can lead to all sorts of problems. Because there can be an assumption that, we're all one human family, we're all the same essentially, we all want the same thing essentially, we all want to live together and get on, and that's what we all want, so we should act as if that's true, and it's not true. We may have similarities when we go down to the biological level, but even those can be overridden by the ideological level. And people living in the warrior culture have a very different view to that. And people living in the religious mindset have a very different view to that. And so that, I think of the line from the Gospels all that time ago, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. It's like there's the innocence is like the optimism, the benevolence, but the wisdom is to go, but it's an evolutionary world. That's the reality. And so we need to find a way to act within the evolutionary world where everyone isn't good according to these new standards, where there are people who are dangerous to the very progress that we see as possible. When I look at my old self, I don't know if this is fair, but I was reading an account of the dodo. The dodo is a pigeon who lands on Mauritius and goes, oh, this is good. I'll stay here, and does, and reproduces and evolves, and there's no predators. So it gets bigger and bigger, and it's comfortable, and it's great, and it doesn't need to fly anymore. It's, it's a good life for a dodo. Until human beings arrive with dogs and probably rats and all of that. And suddenly there's all these predators. And what does the dodo do? Comes up and says, hello. Oh, you're fine. I have no concept of predator. And that's the end of the dodos. And the reason I bring that up is because it feels like, if you are lucky enough, as I have been, to live in a very peaceful culture, to live at a unique time in history, where we have really moved into a more emergent level of ethics, where we have a growing universal benevolence, kindness to all, but you don't have evolutionary wisdom, you're like that dodo. So that when the predator arrives, you don't see them. You don't know what they are because you haven't understood, all of these levels coexist, and we need to be wise to that. So that's one of the problems which I feel like I've had to face in myself, that naivety of going, finding the wisdom to act well isn't as easy as just be nice. It takes a lot more than that. It really is be wise. And I talked in the last chapter about overcoming the moral law. This is the rule. And I feel like one of the struggles that is happening with people and us, me, as we come into this new phase, the future humans, Unividuals, is that there's a big emphasis on really being good, kind of moral integrity. I like that. It's very important to me. Moral, yeah. But it can easily fall into choosing what is right instead of choosing what is wise. And this is a challenge. And it's because you haven't quite thrown off that idea of rules yet. So, I don't know, maybe you're looking at how can we solve this war? Well, we have to solve this war by the good guys winning. And you can't form a compromise. That would be unjust. Well, it might be unjust. But it might be wise. Because otherwise it's just going to go on and the horrors will continue and continue. That may not be the case. But I'm just trying to bring an example of where that desire to do the right thing is not the same as doing the wise thing. By the right thing, in this instance, I mean simply what goes with the moral law that you have. So, for example, when I was younger, I was very young, actually, in my teens, and then for a long time after it, my early teens, I became a pacifist because it seemed war is bad, hurting people is bad, and it was a rule. And of course, people would throw at me all the time, what, you wouldn't defend your mother if she was being attacked by somebody? And I'd wrestle with that and try and argue around it somehow no, I do the right thing. But that's not the wise thing. Because for me now, the wise thing would be to defend her or anyone against a predator. Because I live in a world now with evolutionary wisdom and realize that person is not going to be able to respond to my reasoning. If they could, hurrah. And another kind of in the same area that occurred to me the other day, well, a few years back now, was when the Ukraine war was just starting, and I went to the big festival that we have in Glastonbury where I live, the world famous Glastonbury Festival. Lovely. And people were flying Ukrainian flags in support of the people of Ukraine who'd been invaded. And I was a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND, which is very closely aligned with the festival. And there's a big CND symbol on the famous pyramid stage. And I looked at the flags, and I looked at the CND symbol, and I thought, wow, how lucky that people like me didn't succeed in disarming the West of nuclear weapons. Because if we had, then the aggressor in that war would have nuclear weapons, and we wouldn't. And we would be at their mercy. But my reasoning at the time, rightly, was nuclear weapons. Horrendous. Unbelievably bad. Let's just get rid of them. But it didn't have evolutionary wisdom, which wasn't as easy as, well, it's a bad thing, stop it. It's like, how can I wisely live in a world of all these different levels of emergence? And how can I wisely guide myself and it towards a better future, safely? And then there's another idea I find particularly in spirituality, which has been in me and which I think is in the way of the Unividual transition. And it's another form of naivety, lack of wisdom, which is that if you just come into this emergent state, if you're awake, you don't need wisdom. You just know. It's like with the mystics would say, when you know God, you're just good. You don't need rules. But I would say, in my experience of entering these states a lot, is it didn't stop me being foolish. Because my wisdom is the passivity I've built up of ideating in a better way. Now, it really helps, obviously. The going up is hugely important, changes everything. But I think it's naive to think that suddenly you just become wise, you just know what to do. It's kind of similar to the idea of, the naive idea again, I think, of just surrender. God is looking after everything. God isn't looking after everything. That's not the nature of the vast loving intelligence. It is part of the emergence. It's responding like you are. It's not running the show. You can't just surrender and let it do stuff. No, you need to take responsibility in harmony with it, in communion with it. And that, without a doubt, I would say, when I come into that wonderful unividual communion, then my greatest wisdom is accessible to me. I am wiser. But I haven't arrived. There's no arriving. I still need to keep evolving. And that's my unividual duty, to keep evolving my wisdom, which is how I discern, how I sense, and make sense of this. That's the spiritual journey, I think. So what am I saying here? I'm saying, look, all of morality is based around the idea of individual responsibility. You are responsible for how you respond. The unividual jump is going, and we want to express universal benevolence as best we can. That's the aspiration. It's not just benevolence for me and mine, that limited kindness, but there is a genuine recognition of the oneness of all. But we need to do it with evolutionary wisdom, which understands that it's not as simple as just being nice. It turns out love is not all you need, although I love that song, because it's naive. It's beautiful. Naivety can be beautiful. The big shock, though, is when you go, oh yeah, but naivety can also be dangerous. And when you see that, you realize, oh, you really do need wisdom, and that wisdom needs to be evolutionary. So individual responsibility, universal benevolence, evolutionary wisdom. And those three qualities, which I think define the unividual ethic for me, they all link to my human identity. I am an individual. I'm Tim. And so that's my individual responsibility. But I'm also one with everything. There's a oneness of being. And my being is your being, is the being of every living thing, everything at all. And that brings me, when I see that, it brings me into the Unividual communion. There's the vast loving intelligence, the communion of souls. There's this wishing well to all. So that's about my universal identity. And then everything's in a process of everything's a process of evolutionary emergence. So the wisdom I need is evolutionary wisdom. And that's when I can go, okay, so how you actually express that in this world is challenging. Really, really, really challenging. And to meet that challenge, I need to understand what this is better and better and better. So how do you do that in practice? Let me end with this, how I wrestle with that conundrum, because it sounds like, well, there's a lot to think about here. No, we can't do that. The way I see it is, look, I'm responsible for my choices, so I want to choose wisely. And my responsibility is to involve my wisdom to do that better and better. But what I should do now, in this particular situation, whatever it is, and it's always there, for me, it's about the intuition. Because the intuition is my deep, emergent, unconscious processing, if it's genuinely intuition. It's the best I've got. And it says, do this. And if I'm in a good state, if I've come up, it'll be the best intuition I can have. And that's my conscience. That's the small voice within, as the Quakers say. Beautiful. And then if I can, because I have this ability to reflect, the intuition can arrive and I can reflect on it. I can look at it. And if time allows, the system can then process it again, and maybe a different or better intuition will arise so that my wisdom can grow. I can take more into account. Sometimes there's no time for that. You need to act now, often. Then you can look at it later. You've acted, but you can evaluate it and learn from it and increase your wisdom. So my sense is, look, if I can develop the passivity to keep choosing to go up and to love wisely, to come into the universal perspective, that universal communion, to come into the vast loving intelligence, then I will have the best chance of acting wisely that I've got. But that's an ongoing process. It's not about arriving. It's about having an openness to keep seeing, to engage with the evolutionary process and to develop more of that, of all of it really, to be able to respond better, to come into the universal benevolence more, and to increase my evolutionary wisdom. And in that way, I edge myself forward into being a future person now. And that helps us collectively to move into the next phase of our appreciation of what it is to be a good person. In this chapter, I've been focusing on the challenges we face living a unividual life, being future people now. But in future chapters, I will focus on how far we've come, because it's that which really makes me optimistic, which gives good reasons for a massive confidence that this new phase of our human evolution can happen, that it is happening, and that it can be really good. And I feel that immense confidence, and I want to share it with you. But before we do that, before we come on to those chapters later, I want to stop here and return to epistemology, how we know stuff. And I want to look at a common mistake made particularly by people in spirituality, a mistake I've made myself, which is to believe that my take on the universe is true. I know it's true because I am experiencing it. And I want to suggest that that's a self-verifying loop, that actually that you are experiencing it does not prove that your view of the universe is right at all.